Hello guys, Ping Yao here. Welcome to another episode of New Falmouth. So today's episode we're going to be doing some planning and building in the area immediately behind the North End district and to some extent the Old Town. It's this hilly area here that sits next to the highway and surprisingly is quite steep. Something that I planned originally at the beginning of this project was to have a big kind of hilly backdrop to the city centre, so that when you see New Falmouth, particularly from the waterfront, you'll get this big sort of swathe of greenery immediately behind all of the city centre there. So it's actually quite an important build in terms of giving the appearance, making the kind of look for the city. And although it wasn't necessarily something I was planning to do in this episode, it has kind of evolved as usual with my projects, and I ended up spending a good 3 weeks or so, if not more, working on this area. Not all in one go. I've been having a few technical problems as well, and also got slightly sidetracked because I ended up doing episode 18 halfway through the build. But yeah, it has taken me a little bit of time to get this out. The first thing to say is that this area is called Flushing Hills, and it's quite a big area, and in fact what I end up doing today is only the sort of area immediately behind what I've built so far. It is actually probably another 4 times bigger if you take into account all of the hills on this side of the map, but I haven't got round to doing that on this episode. I have started to just tentatively put some roads and things down, and obviously fiddling about making sure that the gradients of those isn't too steep. But you can see here the kind of road layout is pretty chaotic. It's not necessarily what you would see in a typical kind of American city, but we are talking about quite a steep hill here. So what I tend to do is follow the kind of like natural terrain in order to set my roads up. I don't want to make the roads look too kind of unrealistic and too steep. So that's generally how I plan my roads out. I try and follow the terrain as much as I can, and then obviously just smooth the landscape down. One thing I do find with this game is sometimes with roads and putting houses and things down, you can end up with some pretty steep kind of intimidating terrain issues which you have to get round, and that was an ongoing problem for me throughout this episode, was dealing with the terrain, because this area is surprisingly steep. The top of the hill is about 140 meters above sea level. I measured it with my special procedural object ruler, and yeah, it does form quite a high kind of hillside behind the city, and gives the kind of look that I wanted to get. Ever since I first started planning out New Falmouth, this often was quite a prominent feature in my kind of plans for the city, my sketches. You'll see this kind of hilly terrain immediately sort of behind the city. So Flushing Hills is a predominantly old suburb. It's mainly kind of Victorian housing stock, and there's a few more modern sort of contemporary buildings as well in the mix, but I imagine this would have been laid down in the sort of late 19th century as the city started expanding. Because it is a hillside, obviously it's a little bit tricky in terms of building too many buildings here. I'm not going for Hong Kong here, I'm going for a kind of, you know, a realistic American medium-sized city, so I can't cover it with skyscrapers and things. I just wanted to have smaller homes, little sort of private residential dwellings and things, nothing too big. And really it's just a question of making these houses sit in the terrain as good as you can. A little bit of fiddling about with driveways and things, but to be honest with you, I didn't spend a huge amount of time detailing this up. Most of it is just houses plonked down. Some of them are procedural object buildings such as this one, and yeah, just put some fences down, a few little driveways and paths, but most of the time I don't even bother with that. And then a question of putting trees down. But quite a simple build. It's just quite a large area, so it has taken me quite a long time to get this wrapped up, this episode. I am doing a few more kind of purpose designed houses, or certainly gardens, but most of the detail is fairly light, just because it's a big area and I just don't have the time to be detailing every single house. And the other thing is, once I get the trees down, you'll find that all these little kind of, well, certainly the big cliff edges and the big kind of rocky, the terrain issues that I've got here at the moment, a lot of that's going to be camouflage once I get the trees and the bushes and all that down. And that was one of the main reasons I ended up doing a lot of tree coverage, let's say. The way I decided to kind of detail this was certainly the more prominent houses, the more visible buildings would be a little bit more detailed than those that are more kind of hidden away, let's say. So if you've got more prominent houses that might become visible, especially on kind of aerial views and things like that, and maybe spend a little bit more time detailing those up. But certainly for these houses here, I didn't spend so long, just sort of plonk them in. I might have put a few fences here and there, but I'm really relying on the trees just to try and give the detail. And actually this area, once it's complete, does look pretty heavily detailed, when in fact it really isn't. It's very simply built. I am doing quite a lot of converting to procedural objects, and that's purely so that I can adjust my houses a little bit better. You'll see some of them I was extending the kind of the bottom of the houses and the kind of supporting legs, things like that, on some of those stilt houses. That again is just to make it sort of work with the landscape because of the steepness of the terrain here. As you see, I am putting a few little fences on, again some procedural object fences there, just to fill out some of the detail and avoid it looking too bare, particularly on the sides of the roads there, which are going to be a little bit more visible, let's say. But I'm really not doing a huge amount here. So now what I'm doing is starting to put down a lot of these little trees and hedges, bushes and things, just to start to camouflage the cliff textures there, and also reduce the kind of just the way the terrain works when you're putting these houses down. The kind of, like, I'm not going to say glitchiness of it, because it's not a glitch, it's just the way the terrain works. But it's just a way to try and camouflage a bit of that. Now I could use the tree brush mod, which would obviously speed things up, but because I like to be a little bit more in control when I'm doing these kind of builds, I'm putting down trees literally one at a time, which is very, very painstaking and doesn't make the most interesting video, let's say, but it is a really good way to have complete control over your kind of, you know, the look of this area. Putting certain trees in certain positions, it just means that I've got a lot better control over the general appearance. Now, there's a big concrete object just at the top of the screen, and in case you're wondering what that apparent concrete structure is, well, that's episode 18, guys. I'm not going to say what episode 18 is, but it will be out soon. So you can see by that aerial view how this area is starting to fill out quite nicely. And although it's not necessarily that detailed, as I say, the way I'm using the trees and things does give it quite a detailed kind of look. But it's just a big area, and that's one of the main reasons why it's taken a long time, as well as things like this. So what I started to do here was a kind of embankment or a retaining wall structure here. I've got this big kind of cliff side, which I wasn't a great big fan of, and I wanted to kind of try and reduce that big sort of cliff face there that you get, and certainly reduce some of the warping of the textures that you get sometimes with the cliffs in this game. So I put this retaining wall structure on, which is fine, but then I didn't want to just do that all the way along, so I ended up putting some kind of smaller little retaining wall kind of embankments here, but these didn't quite look right. And as is the way with this city, I find I do 2 steps forward and at least 1 step back in my kind of build and my approach, so it takes a little bit longer to complete a lot of these builds just because I'm never fully satisfied with what I'm doing. And although this might look okay, I think even from the beginning I wasn't completely convinced about that look there with the retaining wall. I did, however, put some rocks in. Now these rocks I have procedurally objected them, so I'm editing them, scaling them, rotating them and so forth, just to try and get them into the position of the cliff there, and it just kind of breaks up some of that warping of the cliff. Sorry, there's a cat on my table. I've got to get the cat off. That's it. And where was I? Completely distracted now. And yeah, just kind of gives it a little bit more detail. It's quite like that kind of approach to insert some of these rocks in, which look fantastic. And yeah, just to try and disguise some of that kind of warping of the landscape. The rocks, the only thing with the rocks is I don't want just to have big kind of like cliff sides, cliff edges here. I still want to keep it quite green. So I am going to be going back to that area in a minute, because I just wasn't very happy with how the rocks were looking in relation to that embankment. So I'm keeping this in the video because I want to show you guys how sometimes you're doing these builds. If you're not fully satisfied with what you've done, then don't worry too much, just go in and change it, because otherwise it's the sort of thing that really bugs me, and it's best to sort it out. So yeah, just working on this highway, which is one of the main kind of arterial routes around the centre of New Falmouth. And yeah, here we go. So this is me now deleting that embankment and putting some trees in instead. And I was a lot happier with this once I positioned those trees a little bit better. And the highway really services the city centre. And I think once everything is kind of functioning, once the city's actually, you know, a bit more filled out, certainly more to the west, then that highway is going to be a lot busier. It's going to be taking a lot more traffic. At this stage, it's still fairly light on traffic, and that's probably because New Falmouth's population is fairly modest, and also because there's not a heck of a lot to drive to up that end of the highway. Most of the city is kind of the opposite direction. But I think once they start to build up the downtown and areas like that, then the highway is going to be a lot busier. So yeah, at this stage it's quite rarely used, that road. Now this little area here with the church is kind of right at the end of Flushing Hills, where it starts to, the land falls back down again towards Lilyville, and eventually you get the river. And I wanted to build a kind of little church and I'm not sure what this is, this building. I mean, it could be a museum or some kind of a government building or something like that. I don't know, council building maybe. But it's certainly not in the city centre, but it does form a kind of little kind of centre to this area, let's say. There's not many shops here, but I do end up putting a few slightly larger residential buildings. There is a junction there from the highway that accesses this area, so that's something that I'm going to be sorry, I'm lifting the cat off again. So it's one of the hazards of doing these recordings. I get cats involved, so apologies for that. But it is I think will become quite a busy little area here once you have that access being used for all the people going to their homes up on the up in Flushing Hills there. And what else to say really is just, yeah, using a lot of trees. I mean, I'd probably have used literally 2,000 or so trees independently placed, I would imagine, in this build, all in, which is a lot of trees. I don't think I'm anywhere near my tree limit. I think probably by the time I finish New Falmouth, if I ever finish New Falmouth, then I will have to use the unlimited tree mod, I think it's called. But at this stage I think I'm well within my range for the numbers of trees. This little kind of building here, which looks a bit strange, is a kind of residential building, although it's actually PO'd, so it doesn't function. But I did just want to add something a little bit more kind of contemporary at the bottom here where it meets the highway. So I end up just putting a sort of little residential block down and adjusting that to get it to fit to the terrain, of course, and then building a little kind of car park here just on this side. So again, because this area is going to be visible, because you've got the highway there, so it's actually going to be quite a visible kind of part of the Flushing Hills, I wanted a little bit more detail, so I spend a bit more time, for example, on this building, which is a very simple building, but I do spend quite a lot of time just working on the kind of landscaping and the surroundings of this building, because as I say, I think it's just going to be a little bit more visible than some of the other buildings in this area. So that's really the key, is just focus on the detail where you think it's going to be visible, because there's no point detailing loads of stuff if at the end of the day it's virtually not seen when you're doing all your kind of cinematics and things. You have to kind of plan out where you think those those more kind of detailed areas are going to be, and then concentrate on those. So again, just putting down some little trees and bushes there, and also some parking lots here on this kind of curved car park, which I thought looked a bit more interesting than just the usual rectangular car park. And finally putting some graffiti on, good old graffiti. But that is, guys, pretty much it. As usual, I could have rambled on a little bit longer, but it's probably just as well that I stop now. So if you haven't already subscribed, please do, just to stay up to date with everything. I'm going to leave you now with these cinematics, and yeah, hopefully episode 18 won't take too long to get out, as it's all pre-recorded. I've just got to edit it and put it together. So goodbye, guys. I'll see you next time, and yeah, thanks for watching.